Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Holochain and Holo AMA. This is AMA number 33. I'm Matthew Schutte, the applied philosopher for Holo. I'm here today with Mary Camacho, our executive director, and David Atkinson, our commercial director. We're going to start off with some quick thank yous. Once again, we'd like to thank our collaborators, contributors, supporters, community builders, partners, and hApp creators who all share the vision of a more distributed internet. Special thanks to those who are writing, reviewing, and/or creating developer and community resources to increase engagement and awareness. We encourage you to visit holo.host and to follow us on Twitter to learn more about what we do. And please check out our forum at forum.holochain.org, where the resources are available to help you build your first Holochain app. Some quick announcements. There are several upcoming meetups and events planned in December and January. Oh, my screen just got full. We've got today a Holochain meetup in New York City. On December 14th, we have a Holochain dinner in Tokyo. On January 10th through 11th, there will be a hackathon in Lisbon, Portugal. On January 22nd, there will be DevCamp 6 online. This is a Holochain online developer training program. So if you've been wanting to build apps, you can learn how to do so during that dev camp. On January 31st through February 2nd, there will be a hackathon in New York City. So a whole bunch of events coming up over the next month and a half or so. Mary, do you want to make a quick announcement before we dive into the questions?
Let me get there. Yes. Hi, everybody. Just want to kind of start talking a little bit about what's going to be happening in the upcoming product releases that we're doing. So to get started, we're going to be, we're doing preparations to ship Holo Ports in 2019. So what I want to talk about a little bit is what's going to be happening. When hosts who have pre-purchased a Holo Port receive it in the mail, it's going to include a Get Started guide. And that will tell you basically how to plug it in, direct you to the starting point online. And from that starting point, you're going to get guided through the connection, getting your HoloPort connected, or the key generation and the registration process for the HoloPort. And at that point, then you're going to have access to what's called the HP admin control panel. We've received a whole bunch of questions for this AMA that are going to get into a lot more of the details of what you can and can't do during this first few weeks of testing. So I'm just going to jump into those now.
All right, so the first one, in closed alpha, can I utilize HoloPort interface for self-hosting and accessing applications like hum.earth, Junto, etc.? Can I start hosting as soon as I receive the port in the next couple of weeks?
Right. So yeah, this gets into some specifics about how time is going to work with HoloPort. So in the first few weeks of testing after the shipment of HoloPorts, hosts will only be able to self-host and test Holo Fuel in the Communities app that are shipping with the HoloPorts. So let me say that again. In the first few weeks, the host can only self-host the test Holo Fuel app and the Communities app that are shipping with the HoloPorts. After that, in our first release in January of 2020, we're going to enable hApp hosting, Holochain app hosting, thus making it possible for other end users via web browsers to access those apps through the Holo network. And then in each regular release after that, we're going to be adding additional features. So the language gets a little complex, I think, with us saying Holo and hosting all the time, or hApp. We seem to repeat the words a lot. So I just want to make sure that that's really clear. So if there's still questions on the way that I said that, for all of you guys that are listening, please kind of add the clarification questions into your chat right now.
Great. All right, next up. What are the things I can definitely do in closed alpha? Self-sovereign identity, peer chat, what else? Mary?
Yeah, so closed is really tricky to accomplish with Holo, because the minute we make general web access of any hosted Holochain app available, really anyone can participate. And that opens up the testing and can introduce a little bit of chaos into the process that actually isn't all that helpful for us getting the testing of the apps and the network that we're trying to get done in these initial weeks. So that's one of the reasons that we're planning a regular release schedule in 2020. We really need to test specific functionality in somewhat managed ways. So at the beginning, what you'll be able to test is the host will be testing specific apps. Then we're going to open it up so that web users, like anybody, can test just a few specific apps via web access, via browser access. And then we're going to start adding functionality like adding other, giving the ability for other people to have other apps loaded or uploaded onto the HoloPort. So it doesn't add all the functionality all at once. It's going to be sort of a little bit of functionality at a time so that we're testing that functionality with our community as we go.
Thanks, Mary. All right, this one should be a little easier. What is test fuel, Mary?
Yeah. So test fuel is actually the currency that's going to be transacted during alpha testing. Test fuel will never be transferable to Holo Fuel or HOT, and it's literally just there for the sake of testing. Every user will start with a test fuel balance of 0. There won't be any credit limits in place, so users can spend into negative balances, thereby giving positive balances to the people who receive it. Basically, users can rack up unlimited test fuel debt and they'll never need to repay it or pay it off. And likewise, people can end up with balances, but it won't mean anything. It is not convertible to anything. It's just an accounting currency within the test instance.
Great, thanks, Mary. So there's not going to be test fuel millionaires? Or there might be test fuel millionaires.
There might be, that just won't
They're not going to
mean
buy a boat with it. All right, next up, where will I exchange fuel to hot, Mary?
Well, as we just said, in this initial test, alpha testing, you won't. With the first release of HoloPorts, we are not enabling any conversion, purchase, exchange, or swap of hot to Holo Fuel or of Holo Fuel to test fuel or hot or any other currency. Those features are going to come out in later releases. And so long as it's still test, it's going to be doing a test of conversion or a test of anything. So long as we're using test fuel, it will not be real. We're working on a release roadmap for 2020, and we'll be sharing that in the coming weeks when we've got that prepared for you.
Thanks, Mary. Next up, when we have HoloPorts, will we then become service providers in the sense that we do not need anything more than the basic fiber optic connections between our computers and do not have to use the services of any other corporation for the new internet to work? Mary?
So I'll answer this one, and then if anybody wants to jump in and support it, I'll take that too. So the new internet, which is really one that bridges between people who are using distributed apps directly, so that means installed Holochain applications in this case, and people who are using a web browser to connect to those same applications. So hosts will need to connect the HoloPort to the internet because that's what allows for the routing to work. That's what allows people who are on the internet to access the Holochain application and network that's being used by people using distributed Holochain applications.
Yeah, and I'll add just a little bit of commentary here. So with the internet, there are a few different layers, right? We have applications, we have routing. I pay Verizon or AT&T to get information to others on the internet. I'm still going to have to pay that. If I have a local connection, I could be running an app with somebody without using that ISP. But if I'm wanting to talk to somebody far away, I'm probably having to go through an ISP. So that portion of the reliance on corporations, we're not changing, at least not yet. The stuff that we're changing is having to go through Facebook or having to go through Twitter, right? So with Holochain and Holo, our ability to run applications that don't rely on those sorts of corporations, that starts to become possible because we're running that using our own devices. But the ability to get the information to one another, that's still going to be dependent on one routing path or another, whether that's using Bluetooth on our devices talking directly, or a local Wi-Fi hub, or going through Verizon or AT&T or Vodafone or whatever. All right, next up. Is KYC needed to create a Holo Fuel account? If so, and for those who aren't familiar with the jargon, KYC is know your customer. It's a regulatory requirement that banks and other people dealing with money or money-like things have to acquire some identification information from their users. So is KYC needed to create a Holo Fuel account? And if so, what degree of personal information would be asked from us? Mary, can you take this?
Yeah, certainly. So this is a great question. So we have not finished with our regulatory process here in Gibraltar. So what I'm sharing here today, it's not finalized, it could change, but I'm going to give people sort of an outline of what we're looking at right now. So what we expect is that when you're creating a Holo Fuel account, there's a couple of different ways you might do it. We were just talking about how there are different ways that people will use applications. Sometimes you'll have a Holochain application that is a direct distributed application just installed. That's distributed, that's not going through Holo or anything, but Holo Fuel is an application created by Holo, which is why there's going to be some kind of implication around regulatory here. So is that to create the account using an installed Holochain application, you probably won't need anything just to create it, because that doesn't require us knowing a whole lot. I mean, you have your keys, you're creating, basically you're installing the app and that creates the account. But if you begin to use Holo Fuel and start submitting transactions that get large, that's when some form of KYC is going to be required. And this is pretty consistent with other levels of regulatory requirement. If you hit certain kind of key numbers, and we're still working out how we're going to identify those, because we're managing this in units of Holo Fuel, not in other currencies. So, but this is the negotiation that we're kind of going through and figuring out. What I will say that's very different is that if you are using Holo Fuel through Holo, in order to get your Holo keys, in order to get the keys for the Holo Fuel application, you have to submit your email. That's part of the process for getting your password. So that is a form of know your customer. That email is the first low-level form of KYC. And beyond that, when you talk about different roles in the ecosystem, where there's hosts or there's app providers, each one of those roles has different levels of identification that's going to be necessary for different reasons. So yes, if you're using Holo Fuel and you're a host, there will be some identification requirements, some KYC requirements. If you're using Holo Fuel and you are also somebody who is an app provider, so you're going to be paying Holo Fuel to hosts, you will also have some identification requirements for that. As the more that you do, and as a host or an app provider, the more requirement, the higher the requirement for identification will likely be. And our plan is to work with third-party KYC providers. So similar to if you participated in the ICO, there was a verification process that people needed to go through in order to participate in the ICO. It'll be something like that for the folks who are going to be hosting and providing and publishing apps.
Thank you, Mary. All right, next up, many folks, and then I said raise his hand, so this person included, will be traveling around the holidays and maybe leaving home as early as the third week of December. When will HoloPorts actually ship? And will we have tracking info to make sure they can be received if we're not home?
Yes. So yes, HoloPorts are being shipped from professional warehouses, and they're going out with tracking and insurance. We're going to be doing a final confirmation with all purchasers so that we have the correct address and order details prior to the ship date. So be on the lookout for that message. I think we'll be making announcements in social media as well to let people know that when that announcement goes out. So if you need to check your spam or something like that to make sure you received it, that's going to be a really important message. So yes. I think we're going to be getting to the rest of that answer on the next one, so let it go.
Right. Next up, What's up with the lawsuit? Can you tell us what's going on and how it could affect HoloPort's delivery or other product delays? We know court systems are slow and riddled with delays. So, what are the potential issues with what's happening?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can talk about this a little bit, but it's a court case and it's ongoing. So I'm going to be a little bit professional about that. We just made an official statement about the ongoing litigation last Friday. We posted it up on the press page of our website. It confirms that that there is an ongoing case right now in California District Court, and that the court will be deciding on several motions. Hopefully, we're expecting it very soon, but they're starting that without a hearing this week, and we've been told that we expect to get a decision as early as next week from them. So we can't say exactly when this is going to happen. Judges don't tell you we're going to give you a decision on a specific date. But however, the court hearing was scheduled for today, and they feel like they have all the information that they need to make this decision. Our attorneys and ourselves are very confident that this is going to be a case that is dismissed. There really is no basis for it whatsoever, because and so we don't see that this will have any effect on our plans to ship HoloPorts in 2019. We're moving forward with all of our testing and our preparations for shipment during the last week of December. So that's that'll be coming up in just a few weeks. So to kind of get back and loop back to the question that was just asked before about people traveling during the holidays and leaving home as early as the third week of December, we're looking at shipping in the last week of December. So it won't hit the Christmas rush necessarily, but it will hit the following week after that.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Next up, will you or your partners be offering any airdrops or anything similar to hot holders as projects start building on Holo? Will RedGrid and other projects develop coins that run on Holo and Holochain? And could there be airdrops for that project, for example? It's a bit confusing to me whether or not a project running a hApp or on Holo would need a coin. And before we get into the answer here, I'm just going to point out airdrops are this weird thing that exists in the blockchain world, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, where people sort of go, hey, you're holding this coin, well, we'll give you some coin too. So that's just a backstory. All right. David.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So as Matt sort of described, a couple of different ways of approaching it. Generally, we haven't used hot or like money as a way to catalyze community of any type. I think some of you have been, whether the AMAs or some of you were on the Telegram chat with Eric Bear, or have been to a lot of our community events. And we believe that building vibrant communities that are excited about the solutions or the possibilities of what they can do with the technology we're building. There's a different way of building motivation and building community that doesn't relate to distributing tokens or money. So that's been consistent from the start and actually before the genesis of Holo and Holochain in terms of how we approach community building. It's a really important foundation for this response. In terms of like pulling apart, there's some really great parts to this question. But so Holo Fuel will be the currency that powers our hosting network. It's the way that the organizations or people who have built applications that want them hosted, so users who use web browsers can access those applications, pay, just like you would pay for cloud hosting today. And Holo Fuel is the mutual credit dynamic supply asset-backed currency that powers that network. Without the currency, you couldn't build a distributed hosting network. And so that's a pattern for currency design that we imagine many will want to follow. You probably can't build an energy grid the way RedGrid are doing it without also building a currency that supports the unique characteristics of distributed energy. Right? So we imagine that RedGrid and others who are looking to transform their industries, marketplaces, whatever, will also building their own mutual credit currencies on top of Holo. And some of them will be wanting to use Holo and therefore Holo Fuel to be able to serve their applications into web users. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a context of the layering of the different currencies that other projects will be building, the currency that we're building to support our hosting network, and the way that we're approaching community building. And I guess because mutual credit currencies are a funny one in that they really support productive economies, the idea of like giving stuff away as a fine is kind of not in line with how you're thinking about building productive mutual credit economies, because what you're doing is aligning incentives and supporting really productive activity, both, well, productive activity within that economy. So yeah, I think what we'll hopefully be seeing in the next 5-10 years is a massive shift into tools that can support collaboration, communication, economies at scale. So we won't be asking this kind of question in 5 years' time.
Yeah, but when Moon, when Airdrop. Just kidding. All right. So next up, how would Holochain work for an app like Trello, where groups collaborate on a private board that only they are allowed to see? Can you have a private DHT, that's a distributed hash table, so that the shared group data isn't public? Or is there another way to have redundant data while also protecting a group's privacy? So I'll touch on this. So I use Trello regularly. Our team uses Trello regularly. We actually started a Trello app on the first version of Holochain. There's a GitHub link that we'll probably share in the chat. And to be honest, you're thinking about it right. If you want a shared Trello board for a private group, you could implement it as its own app DNA so that only members of your group would have access to the data on the DHT. However, you could have many boards in that same group. And you could even have sort of like we do with our hApp versions of Slack, etc. You can have a channel where you want only certain members, and that channel would have its own DNA. So you could have a board that has its own DNA. So it's kind of like making a new DNA for a Slack team. In that way, a group could have many different public channels, like a Trello group could have many different boards. So there's a variety, we've talked about this in other AMAs as well. There's a variety of ways to deal with private communication, wanting a select group of people to be able to communicate about something with one another. There are tools that we can use, making use of encryption and shared keys. There are tools that we can make use of by actually running multiple DNAs for different sort of shared spaces, so that only the members running that particular DNA, that particular board, that particular channel are privy to the conversations that are happening therein. Next up, can you explain why you chose such a big supply of hot?
I'll take that.
Yeah.
Okay, so as David was just talking about, Holo Fuel, which is the eventual currency that's going to power the hosting platform, it's optimized for the microtransactions that we need to be operating the Holo platform. And because of increases in value, we needed to have a starting point that gave us a small enough unit such that it will remain operating as a microcurrency. So it really needs to be tiny, because it's not going to be making $10 and $20 transfers. It's going to be making microtransaction, are going to be what we're calculating on for hosting. And those, that's just part of the design of the currency. And that's why the HOT, which was the token that was made to be converted into that currency, needed to reflect the design demands of Holo Fuel.
And I'll just add to that. Yeah, my take on it, sort of saying the same things in a slightly different way, is we wanted to be able to do micro transactions, tiny payments, maybe fraction of a penny kind of payments. Nothing in the world really does that well today at scale. In order to do that, after people actually adopt this, like if we are successful, people adopt this, and Holo Fuel becomes much more valuable than it is today, we needed to have enough supply that each unit was still small enough to be doing those kinds of microtransactions. If you only have $100 bills, you're not able to sell candy bars, because you don't have units small enough to foster those kinds of individual transactions. So that was really the gist. Next up, does the prototype need to be online 24/7? I think they mean the HoloPort. And can the HoloPort be upgraded with additional memory, CPU, or hard disk to increase its earnings? David, can you take this one?
Yeah, sure. So no, your pods don't need to be online 24/7. Again, it's kind of a time frame question right at the start. That's fine, but over time, we'll be implementing hosting service quality metrics and preferences. And so the hosts that have a more reliable or that have, hosts that are unreliable or have low uptime, they might find themselves outcompeted on service quality. So not getting the supply that they would like, basically. Which is going to be, well, we're really excited to have the network running and seeing how people are responding and seeing how people are interacting with the system and seeing how hosts that need to switch it off, how do they respond? What happens? How do they want to configure their network so that they receive a better rating and they can compete on quality, right? In terms of the updating or upgrading of the HoloPorts, so we will likely implement features that allow upgrading of HoloPorts. Right now, because everyone's earning test fuel, there's no point to do this. And virtual machines can already be configured to take advantage of the underlying hardware specs. Yeah.
Great. Next up, would it be possible to move an existing web app that uses a centralized SQL database over to Holochain and migrate historical data too? Or would the dramatically different architecture mean you'd have to make a totally fresh start? Mary, can you touch on this?
Sure. So it's definitely possible to move an existing web app to Holochain. The migration of historical data, that would be more challenging. We haven't really evaluated the use cases for that directly. That's not what we're doing as part of the work right now inside of Holo. But I imagine some others have. I'd actually suggest this kind of question be posted out on the Holochain forum, because that's where folks who are building other types of apps on Holochain and looking to host them on Holo are chatting with each other. Do you guys have any other comments on that one, Matthew, David?
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with you that it's not a thing that we've dove into too much. I reckon that people are going to start building widgets to make this kind of thing more easy. Somebody's probably going to come up with a service for helping migrate your stuff over to Holochain, et cetera. But the agent-centric nature of Holochain is so very different from the centralized assumptions that are baked into SQL databases and existing web apps, that there's just a pretty significant shift required there. That's a very, as the question pointed out, it's a very different architecture. And so taking something that was born in this one context and trying to shoehorn it into this very different context is going to I think there's going to be a learning process as people figure out whether they want to do that, and if so, how to do it. I'm sure somebody will figure some useful formulas there, maybe in a particular context, like taking WordPress sites and moving them into a different thing so that they're able to make use of a similar pattern repeatedly. I don't know. But that's just my hunch. David, thoughts? Nah.
I mean, in terms of, my quick thought is there are a lot of people that I think that, within the ecosystem that are either building on some kind of centralized solution now to move over to Holochain, or thinking about what are the kind of web apps that could be ported over. And there are also, I mean, a little while ago, there are a few web apps that we were thinking, well, wow, these apps were amazing, but they couldn't find a business model that allowed them to survive in the centralized world. Imagine porting over imagine porting this app over into a Holochain environment where the community could then keep the app alive, because the infrastructure costs, as the app gets more popular and scales, the relationship with infrastructure costs in a Holochain environment changes. Right, so there's definitely a lot of interest in this area, and I'd say, like, as we think about how ecosystems truly emerge, it's when there's interest and when there's a solution that really transforms the way things work or transforms the way how much things cost, then there are going to be some really cool tools and ideas and energy around solving these kind of problems. So for me, it's like, yes, I can't wait to see solving of those problems, but my head is on getting the ports shipped first.
Awesome. All right. Next up, sitting behind an ISP. Not sure if a static IP from outside will be needed, and if so, how this is solved without the need for registering for a DNS service. There's a whole lot of jargon in there. So ISP is internet service provider. A static IP is sort of like a assigned address. A DNS service is domain names service. So yeah, Mary, you want to take that jargon-filled question on?
Sure, it's pretty straightforward. So a static IP is not needed for Holo hosting. The Holo network really is a VPN, essentially, which is a virtual private network. And that, inside of that context, you're going to, the port will be assigned an internal static IP to each device. And so we'll know how to route to you. That's the point of registering the Holo port on the network. It's so that we know where you are and we know how to identify you and we can route traffic to you. Yeah, there's a lot more into that, and I think we'll be sharing somehow or another, I think, in some of our technical docs over the course of the coming months as different things come out, more details about how the routing works, and will get shared in ways that people can understand that might not be full of all of this jargon. I'm not sure. Maybe it'll be full of more jargon. It's hard.
It's asking questions at that level.
Yeah.
The jargon is scary, but I'm trying to make it understandable for people who are not, theirs, who are not plugging away at that level.
Well, hopefully I answered the question for you.
Yeah, you nailed it. Next up, plugging Holo ports into the internet-facing router. Are there ports that will need to be opened or redirected, Mary?
So this is a fun question. I actually want to call out that the use of the word port in the question is actually not referring to the Holo port. So for those who are listening, these are talking about ports that can be assigned different routing numbers. I don't even know what we call them, but essentially in basically the answer is that in almost all cases, no ports are going to have to be open or redirected on your router. It really won't take configuration in most cases. There will probably be edge cases for all of these things. We understand that there's 100 different ways that people's networks can be configured. We are optimizing for the most standard ones right now, and we will work to provide more detail for people who are working in those edge case situations and scenarios as we go along during the testing process and that sort of thing. So we expect to hear from people if you don't have a standard setup.
That sounds great. All right, next up. What new partners do you have or are you in talks with? And David, I'm going to ask you to take this one on.
Yeah, sure. So I think we're looking at a couple of different ways. So we're spending a lot of time with partners like Redgrid, who are building out their tech fast, or you could see some of see our partnership with Aeroband that were one of the keynotes at the Malta Blockchain Summit. And these guys are really focused on transforming a particular industry, whether it's energy, aviation. So we'll work with them on currency design, we'll work with them on business models, we'll work with them on tech. So that's and other areas that's going really well, and I think we're comfortable with the kind of partners there at the moment. I think if anyone also has kind of got that deep experience and expertise in a particular industry, really embedded relationships, and a view to how the industry can transform, then we're also really interested in talking. But at the moment, it feels like a manageable set. Then we're doing quite a lot on kind of the idea of marketplaces at the moment, and that could be like literal marketplaces or like the marketplace of logistics, supply chain, etc. And we've got some pretty exciting partnerships that we should be announcing over the next few months. And at the level below that, these marketplaces are made possible, or marketplace solutions are made possible because of the modular design of Holochain, Holo, and the various apps that you can configure, right? And so with apps like DeepKey, we get to have conversations around how distributed identity really works, right? And so what's fantastic, say, in some of the conversations we're having around identity is there's a lot of people out there making really great secure identity businesses and business models, but their version of security breaks down when their data that they're holding about people is centralized in a certain place in their stack. And they're aware of that, they just don't know how to solve the problem. So what's great about some of the conversations that are happening at the moment is we're moving into some of the apps or modules that make Holochain and Holo what they are, and having distinct conversations about how those modules can transform a business or what we think is a niche industry for the whole potential of Holochain, which is actually trillions of dollars. You know? So I hope that gives a little bit of context of the kind of conversations that we're having. Obviously, our focus has always been build first. And we're at this stage now where we're really focusing on some MVPs in the cases that I just mentioned.
Thanks, David. Next up, are you aware of a place where entrepreneurs, not devs, even though they may also be that, can have conversations to build the kind of decentralized business models that would be needed to make this work well? Are you planning to set that into motion? If not, is there someone who would be a champion with Holo that could support such a circle of decentralized business solutions or some such thing? As I'm moving closer to the operational phase of Jolla will do in the Philippines first, of what Jolla will do in the Philippines first, I'm coming closer to putting together the technical architecture and business plan structure. And I wonder if we need to build such a place of communication to deliberate our approaches, or if it already exists. Mary, can you touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. It's something that I've been thinking about for quite a while. So yes, we are planning to those sorts of conversations at some open space events that are called Inventing Open Business. And these are the sorts of topics we want to encourage in those kinds of collaborative settings. Our team that works with communities is the right place to engage this sort of question directly, because we're still sorting through how might we also promote these kinds of conversations effectively online. So what I'd say is look first at what we're doing with events. I don't know if any of them have been announced yet, but I know there's a couple that are being scheduled right now that are called the Inventing Open Business series. And then also, if you want to just get on the forum, whether it's the Holochain, is it the Holochain forum, David, where they can connect in with the communities team,
Yep.
The events team? Great. So that's what to do. But love that this is the engagement that people are wanting to have. I think really digging into what are the new models for business that can be made possible with distributed applications. That's a critical type of conversation that we all need to be in. And it's a creative and collaborative conversation.
Yeah, I should add, there's a channel, I think, I can't remember, it's called Social Impact or Social Entrepreneurs, but there's a channel in the public Motormost that's connecting some of the people who are thinking about this, you know, the guys at Sacred Capital, guys at Hum. So there's the place, forum is a good place as well.
Awesome. All right, next up, where can we get the best or longest list of hApps for Holo? Tired of hearing Holo doesn't have any hApps, mostly by Ethereum zealots. May I also suggest you set up a page on your site and add all hApps, including what comes out of hackathons? Thanks. David, can you touch on this?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are a couple of places where you can find where you can find the list of hApps for Holo. So there's a GitHub site, which is github.com/holochain/apps. and sure the link will be posted in a minute. And this has a list of projects that have been built 2017, 18, 2019, including the projects or apps that are currently in active development on top of Holochain, and also a list of apps that were built on the proto version of Holochain. So that's a good place to look. There's also a number of projects, which is a little bit different, that have been profiled on the forum. So forum.holochain.org/c/projects. And there's a couple of community maintained resources that we'll get the links for and distribute them around later on, which have different members of the community who have been building their version of the kind of the authoritative list of Holochain projects. And so we actually should, I was just chatting to Bear about this question, and we don't have a list, an external list of the kind of stuff that's been built at hackathons. One of the reasons was then versions of Holochain would change, and then so tech would become deprecated. Or if you can see, Phil Beatles made a post recently about a chat app that he's just built from scratch using the tech stack we've got available now. And it's kind of like the 4th chat app he's built over 18 months. So there's this evolution of what we're doing, how we're working, what's possible. That's also kind of, in a way, inbuilt into our development DNA, which is it's fine to just put something out, prototype it, test it, get feedback, then evolve it. And you could even refactor, like for example, in chat, refactor. So there's a few reasons we don't have this like complete all-time authoritative list, but hopefully this helps you.
Great, thanks, David. All right, next up we have, how will Holo Fuel be created, and how many Holo Fuel will be created? Mary, can you address that?
I was muted. Sorry about that. So this kind of gets to the question that we were talking about at the beginning here. And when we ship HoloPorts, we're going to be in a test environment. So we're going to be using test fuel. So that will not be Holo Fuel, real Holo Fuel. And in the test environment, there's no amount of test fuel. There are no, it's a mutual credit, currency units that can go up and down, and you can have a negative balance or a positive balance in this initial testing period. So, but I don't know if that's actually the question. So Holo Fuel, when we go live, will be one-to-one with hot as a starting point. So we have a fixed supply of hot, but Holo Fuel is not a fixed supply currency. So there is an article that is posted up on the Medium blog for Holo that talks a little bit. Actually, we're going to be posting this soon with just a couple of updates related to testing and sort of to give a refresh on it. But basically, that Medium post kind of goes through how the Holo Fuel economy changes through time. Because when we first go live with beta, we're still going to be relatively in a fixed supply environment, the way that it's going to work. And then over time, as certain features are enabled, because we don't want to do this all at once, we want to actually have it come in a controlled sort of manner. So as the features like credit limits are activated such that hosts can give credit, that starts enabling the dynamic supply of Holo Fuel. Which works a little bit differently, and which we've explained in depth in some of our Holo Fuel economics papers. There's the Holo Fuel 101 presentation that folks can read. There's, I believe, a video that Alistair provided publicly for that. There's a couple of different things out there, and maybe some links can be put out there on the chat regarding that.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple of other things for just the simplicity. So you had mentioned, Mary, that hot will be exchangeable for Holo Fuel, not for this test era, but at a later stage.
Yeah, eventually.
The supply of hot is a little over 177 billion hot tokens, and those are exchangeable on a 1 1-to-1 basis for Holo Fuel. People can choose to exchange them 1 token of HOT for 1 unit of Holo Fuel initially.
So can I add some clarity there? Because I don't use those words very specifically. Holo is not an exchange. So we are not exchanging per se. On the reserve, people can purchase Holo Fuel with HOT. And then at some point we will announce a swap and people can effectively swap their HOT for Holo Fuel, which is at that point will be, once the swap is complete, we will no longer offer that. That is very different than being an exchange. And we have to be careful because we're a regulated entity not to confuse ourselves out there in the market as, you know, and not to present ourselves as an exchange. So that's the only reason I really am careful about that.
Great, thank you. But then the other piece that Mary was pointing out is later, you know, that is not the sum total of units that will be available in that ecosystem. Over time, we will add things like credit limits, et cetera, that will start to enable a fluctuation of the supply of Holo Fuel. But that will not be the earliest phases of Holo Fuel. The supply will be around 177 billion, possibly, depending on what gets it redeemed or what Holo Fuel people purchase with HOT, et cetera. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that is the end of our AMA. Again, I'm Matthew Schutte here with Mary Camacho and David Atkinson. Thank you to all the rest of our team who made this so wonderfully easy to do. Polly, Kashka, the whole rest of the crew. We are going to be off for the rest of the year. Our next AMA is not until January, I think somewhere in the middle of January. Not
You're
off
going to be
working.
working hard.
We'll be working off and working, not broadcasting. But we hope you have wonderful holidays wherever you are, whether it's summer in the Southern Hemisphere or winter in the North. And we will see you next year. Bye all.